The $340,000 cashier's check felt heavier than it should have as I placed it on my parents' dining room table, the same table where they'd told me 11 years earlier that they had no money for my college education. Their faces cycled through joy, relief, and then complete shock as they stared at enough money to pay off their mortgage in full, while I sat calmly across from them, waiting to explain the one condition that came with their financial salvation. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't making people pay for underestimating you, it's having enough wealth to save them, but only after they acknowledge exactly how wrong they were about your potential. Drop a money bag emoji below if you've ever watched your family's financial priorities backfire so spectacularly that you became the bank they could never afford to borrow from. This one's for everyone who turned being told we can't afford it into the motivation that built their empire. My name is Ashley Williams, I'm 32 years old, and what happened when I walked into my parents' kitchen last month with that check completely transformed our family's understanding of priorities, consequences, and which child they should have invested in when it actually mattered. That check wasn't just a generous gift from their successful daughter, it was a decade-delayed response to being told they had no money for my $18,000 annual college expenses, followed immediately by them spending $45,000 on my sister Emma's dream wedding 6 months later. Let me take you back 11 years to that devastating conversation in May 2013, when I sat across from my parents at this exact same kitchen table, nervously presenting my college acceptance letters and financial aid information, only to have my dreams crushed by 2 words, no money. I was 18 years old, had just graduated as valedictorian of my high school class, and had been accepted to 3 excellent universities with partial academic scholarships. But even with the scholarships, I needed $18,000 annually for tuition, room, board, and expenses, money that would require family support to make college financially possible. Mom, Dad, I know this is a lot to discuss, but I wanted to show you my college options and talk about how we can make this work financially, I said, spreading the acceptance letters and financial aid documents across their dining room table. Ashley, these schools look wonderful, and we're proud of your academic achievements, Mom said with the tone people use when they're about to deliver disappointing news. But we need to be realistic about our financial situation. What do you mean? Dad cleared his throat in that way he did when he was preparing to explain why something I wanted wasn't possible. Sweetheart, we just don't have the resources to contribute to college expenses right now. We're dealing with our own financial pressures, mortgage payments, car loans, your mother's medical bills from last year. I understand there are expenses, but I'm not asking you to pay for everything. With my scholarships and a part-time job, I just need help covering the gap. The gap is still substantial, Mom said, reviewing the financial aid documents. $18,000 per year for 4 years, that's over $70,000 total. We simply don't have that kind of money. What if I took out student loans for part of it? Ashley, we're not going to let you start adult life buried in debt. That's not responsible financial planning. The conversation continued for another hour, with my parents explaining why college expenses were beyond their financial capabilities, why starting my career with significant debt would be a mistake, and why I should consider alternatives like community college or working for a few years before pursuing higher education. We're not saying you can't go to college eventually, Dad explained. We're saying that right now, with our current financial situation, we can't provide the support you need to attend these universities. But I worked so hard to earn these scholarships. I was valedictorian. I did everything right to make college affordable. And you should be proud of those achievements. But even with scholarships, college is still expensive, and we have to make decisions based on what we can actually afford. I left that conversation devastated but determined to find another way. If my parents couldn't help with college expenses, I would figure out how to fund my education independently through work, loans, and whatever resources I could access without family support. What I didn't anticipate was discovering just 6 months later how quickly my parents' financial situation could improve when it came to expenses they considered truly important. The revelation came in November 2013, when my sister Emma announced her engagement to her college boyfriend Tyler and began planning what she described as her dream wedding. I was working two part-time jobs and attending community college when Emma shared the exciting news about her upcoming celebration. "Tyler proposed during our anniversary dinner last weekend," she gushed during our family dinner. "We're thinking about a June wedding, something really special to celebrate the beginning of our marriage." "How exciting," Mom said, immediately shifting into wedding planning mode. "What kind of celebration are you envisioning?" "Well, we've been looking at venues, and there's this gorgeous country club that would be perfect. They have a ballroom that holds 200 people, beautiful gardens for photos, and they handle all the catering and coordination." "That sounds expensive," I said, thinking about the conversation we'd had about college costs just 6 months earlier. "It is pricey," Emma admitted, "but this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Tyler and I want everything to be perfect." "How much are we talking about?" Dad asked, but his tone was interested rather than concerned, completely different from how he'd discussed my college expenses. "The venue, catering, flowers, photography, dress, and everything else would be about $45,000 for the kind of wedding we're dreaming about." $45,000. More than twice what I'd needed annually for college, and they were discussing it as an investment in Emma's happiness rather than an impossible financial burden. "Well," Dad said, "this is our daughter's wedding. We'll find a way to make it work." "Are you sure?" Emma asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer would be yes. "Emma, this is important," Mom said firmly. "We've always planned to help with your wedding expenses when the time comes. We'll figure out the financial details." The contrast was impossible to ignore. College education for Ashley, impossible financial burden that required years of planning and sacrifice. Dream wedding for Emma, important family investment that they would figure out through financial creativity they'd claimed didn't exist when discussing my future. Over the next 6 months, I watched my parents transform from people with no money for education expenses into enthusiastic financiers of Emma's elaborate wedding celebration. They took out a second mortgage on the house to fund the festivities, borrowed against Dad's retirement account, and even asked extended family members to contribute to what became a $47,000 celebration of Emma's marriage to Tyler. The wedding was everything Emma had dreamed about: elegant venue, professional photography, designer dress, flowers that cost more than my entire semester's tuition. I worked as a server at the reception, earning $150 for the evening while watching my parents celebrate their ability to provide their daughter with the perfect beginning to her married life. But what hurt most wasn't the money itself, it was the message about whose dreams and futures were worth investing in when resources required sacrifice and creativity to access. During the wedding reception, as I served champagne to guests who were praising my parents for their generosity in providing such a beautiful celebration, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I was going to become so financially successful that their financial priorities would never again limit my opportunities. I spent the next 4 years working full-time while attending community college and then transferring to complete my bachelor's degree at a state university. I graduated with $35,000 in student loan debt but also with a degree in computer science and internship experience that led to my first job as a software developer. But I wasn't content with just covering my own expenses. I was building toward the kind of financial independence that would give me options my parents had never imagined I could access. I lived in a studio apartment, drove a used car, and invested every spare dollar in a combination of stock market investments, real estate, and eventually, my own consulting business. While Emma and Tyler were building their comfortable suburban lifestyle with ongoing parental support, I was building wealth through the kind of disciplined financial planning my parents had claimed was impossible for college expenses. By age 25, I had paid off my student loans and accumulated $180,000 in investments. By age 28, my consulting business was generating $200,000 annually, and my investment portfolio had grown to $450,000. By age 30, I was earning $300,000 annually and had assets worth over $800,000. But the real breakthrough came 2 years ago, when my software consulting business was acquired by a major technology company for $2.3 million. Combined with my existing investments, the acquisition gave me liquid assets of over $3 million and ongoing income from both employment and investments. I had achieved exactly the kind of financial independence I'd dreamed about during those years of working multiple jobs to pay for college, the kind of independence that made other people's financial limitations irrelevant to my own opportunities and choices. But I had also been watching my parents' financial situation deteriorate over those same years, as the debt they'd accumulated for Emma's wedding combined with other financial pressures to create exactly the kind of crisis they'd claimed to be experiencing when I needed college support. The call came 3 months ago, when Dad's voice on the phone carried the same tone he'd used 11 years earlier when explaining why my college dreams weren't financially possible. "Ashley, we need to talk to you about something important," he said during one of our monthly check-in conversations. "What's going on?" "We're struggling with the mortgage payments. The second mortgage we took out, combined with some unexpected medical expenses and changes in Mom's income, have put us in a difficult position." "How difficult?" "We're 3 months behind on payments, and the bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. We need to find $340,000 to pay off both mortgages completely, or we're going to lose the house, $340,000 to save the family home. The same house they'd used as collateral to fund Emma's wedding while telling me they had no money for my education." "Have you talked to Emma about helping with this situation?" "Emma and Tyler are dealing with their own financial pressures. They've got the new house, 2 car payments, and Emma's expecting their second child. They just don't have the resources to help with something this substantial." The irony was perfect. Emma, whose wedding had contributed to their current crisis, didn't have resources to help solve the problem her celebration had helped create. "Dad, I might be able to help with this situation." "Jordan, we appreciate the thought, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. This isn't something you could realistically." He trailed off, clearly remembering that he didn't actually know the details of my current financial situation. "Actually, Dad, I think I might be able to help more than you realize. Can we meet this weekend to discuss the details?" The meeting took place on a Saturday afternoon in March, in the same kitchen where they'd told me 11 years earlier that they had no money for my college education. I arrived with a leather portfolio containing financial documents that would reveal exactly how wrong they'd been about my potential for building wealth and success. "Ashley, we're so grateful you're willing to discuss this situation with us," Mom said as we settled around the dining room table. "We know it's a lot to ask, but we didn't know who else to turn to." "Before we talk about solutions," I said, "I want to make sure I understand the full scope of the financial problem." Dad spread out their mortgage statements, bank notices, and foreclosure documents, a comprehensive picture of the financial crisis that stemmed from years of poor decision-making and debt accumulation that had started with Emma's wedding financing. "So you need $340,000 to completely resolve the mortgage debt and avoid foreclosure?" "That's correct. It would clear both mortgages and give us a fresh start financially." I opened my portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper, a bank statement showing my current liquid assets of $1.8 million. "Actually," I said, sliding the statement across the table, "I think I can help you solve this problem." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced with my parents. They stared at the bank statement, reading and rereading the numbers, trying to process what they were seeing. "Ashley," Mom whispered, "this says you have almost $2 million in your accounts." "That's correct. The software business I built was acquired 2 years ago, and combined with my investments, I have sufficient resources to pay off your mortgage debt immediately." "But how? When did you? We had no idea you had this kind of money." "I've been building wealth for over a decade, using the same financial discipline and planning skills you claimed didn't exist when I needed college funding." Dad was still staring at the bank statement. "You could write a check right now for the full $340,000? "I could. But I have one condition that's non-negotiable if you want my financial assistance." "What kind of condition?" I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a prepared statement, a letter I'd been working on for weeks, knowing this moment would eventually arrive. "I want you to read this letter aloud, together, acknowledging the financial choices you made regarding Emma's wedding versus my college education, and recognizing how those choices reflected your priorities and values as parents. Ashley, we understand you might have some resentment about the college situation. This isn't about resentment. It's about truth and accountability. For over a decade, I've listened to family conversations where you've praised Emma's success, celebrated Tyler's career, and talked about how proud you are of their achievements. But you've never acknowledged that their comfortable lifestyle was built on financial support you refused to provide for my education. We helped Emma with her wedding because weddings are important family celebrations. You helped Emma with her wedding because you valued her happiness more than my future. You found $47,000 for her party while claiming you couldn't afford $18,000 annually for my education. I handed them the letter. If you want me to solve your financial crisis, you'll read this statement acknowledging the unequal treatment, explaining how you justified spending tens of thousands on Emma's celebration while refusing to invest in my education, and apologizing for prioritizing her wants over my educational needs. The letter was 2 pages long and contained a comprehensive accounting of their financial choices, the impact those choices had on both daughters, and an acknowledgement that their current crisis was partly the result of debt accumulated while funding Emma's lifestyle rather than investing in their children's long-term success. Ashley, this is humiliating. You're asking us to read a confession of bad parenting in exchange for financial help. I'm asking you to acknowledge the truth about decisions you made and priorities you demonstrated. The same way you made me acknowledge the reality of my financial limitations when I needed college support. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with my parents struggling to understand why I would attach conditions to financial assistance they desperately needed. But eventually, they realized that reading a letter acknowledging their financial favoritism was a small price to pay for keeping their home. If we read this letter and apologize for our treatment of your college situation, will you pay off both mortgages completely? I'll have the bank transfer initiated on Monday morning. $340,000, clearing all mortgage debt, giving you a fresh financial start. They read the letter together, with voices that cracked when acknowledging how their financial choices had impacted their daughters differently, and how their assumptions about my potential had been catastrophically wrong. If you're still watching at this point, drop priorities in the comments so I know who understands that sometimes the most powerful response to being told we can't afford it is building enough wealth to prove that it was never about affordability, it was about what they valued most. The mortgage payoff was completed the following week. My parents kept their home, avoided foreclosure, and learned that the child they'd assumed lacked financial capability had actually built more wealth than they'd accumulated in 30 years of marriage. But more importantly, our family dynamic shifted in ways that recognized everyone's actual contributions and achievements rather than assumptions about who deserved investment and support. Emma's reaction to learning about my financial assistance was exactly what you'd expect: shock that her sister had the resources to solve their parents' crisis, followed by hurt that I'd attached conditions to helping our family during an emergency. Ashley, I can't believe you made Mom and Dad read that letter as payment for your help, she said when she called me after learning about the mortgage payoff. Emma, I made them acknowledge the truth about how they treated us differently when it came to financial support. But that's in the past. Why bring it up now when they needed help? Because patterns of favoritism don't just disappear when they become inconvenient. They needed to understand how their choices affected both of us. 6 months later, when I was featured in a regional business magazine as one of the top entrepreneurs under 35, my parents called to congratulate me with genuine pride and enthusiasm, the kind of recognition I'd been hoping for since high school graduation. Ashley, we saw the magazine article about your business success, Dad said. We're so proud of what you've accomplished, and we're sorry it took us so long to understand what you were building. Thank you. I appreciate you recognizing the work I've been doing. We realize now that we made assumptions about your financial potential that were completely wrong. We should have supported your college dreams the same way we supported Emma's wedding plans. The check that saved their home wasn't just a financial transaction, it was a decade-delayed response to being told I wasn't worth investing in, followed by immediate evidence that they'd been wrong about my potential. It was also a demonstration that success isn't just about proving people wrong, it's about having enough resources to help them when they need it, even if that help comes with conditions that force them to confront uncomfortable truths about their own behavior. Sometimes the most powerful way to address family favoritism isn't through arguments or complaints, it's through building success so undeniable that people have to reassess everything they thought they knew about your capabilities and potential. And sometimes the sweetest vindication is having enough wealth to solve problems for people who once claimed you weren't worth investing in. What unequal treatment have you experienced from family members who claimed they couldn't afford to support your dreams while finding money for someone else? Share below if you've ever been told there was no money for your education while watching thousands get spent on a sibling's celebration.